This episode of the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour is sponsored by the law offices of Alfred Guillaume III, a boutique criminal defense firm located in Washington, D.C. The firm specializes in defending federal criminal cases. You can learn more about the firm by visiting our website at guillaumelaw.com. That's GUILLAUME law.com. Welcome to part one of my interview with Harvard law-trained attorney Jeremi Duru. Jeremi is a professor of law at American University. He serves as of counsel to a prestigious D.C. law firm, and most notably, he's one of the nation's foremost authorities on sports and the law. He's written and lectured extensively on the hiring practices of the NFL, including the lack of diversity amongst head coaches. He's a published author, having written such books as Advancing the Ball and The Business of Sports Agents, which he co-authored with several other prominent figures in the sports world. And if that wasn't impressive enough, he also has a connection to one of my favorite film directors of all time, Mr. Spike Lee. We covered lots of topics in this interview, and I cannot wait for you all to listen. If you want to see what we look like, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. And also, please continue to follow this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to another episode of the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. I'm so honored to be joined by attorney at law, professor at law, and sports enthusiast at law, Professor N. Jeremi Duru. How you doing, sir?
Alfred, I'm great, man. Appreciate being here.
We really appreciate you coming on. You're a hard man to get a hold of. You're traveling the world and such, so.
I apologize for that, man. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, so I'm glad that we're together.
I'm really appreciative of you coming on, and I'm anxious to get into a lot of different topics with you. And we've been talking a lot off camera about a variety of subjects. And I told you just a moment ago, just before we went live, that I have a Brown University story.
Yeah.
For those of us that don't maybe know who you are a proud graduate of Brown University, undergrad, and you are a proud graduate of Harvard Law School. Is that correct?
That's right.
Those are two Ivy League institutions, which is just, wow, I'm blown away already.
Oh, man, I don't know. I'm not sure it merits that reaction, man, but I did have a good experience at both schools, I will say, yeah.
How did you end up at Brown, first of all?
So actually, my older brother went to Brown.
Okay, so it's a family affair.
Yeah, well, it began with him. And there were two things about it that attracted me. One was that he was there. As much as I didn't want to admit it at the time, I was scared.
How much? What's the age difference between you two
He's
guys?
3 years older.
Okay, so he was finishing up and you were just starting.
Yeah, so he was a senior when I was a freshman.
Okay.
And being able to go someplace where my big brother was there was very meaningful to me. Even though, as I said, I didn't let him know, so that was one part of it. Then the other part of it that's interesting is Brown has what they call the open curriculum, which is a curriculum where you, outside of what you have to take for your major, there are no distribution requirements. So you don't have to take one math, two Englishes, one science.
Right. I definitely don't take math. That's not my strong point.
Exactly. So I did not
That's why you went to law school, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so being able to have that kind of intellectual freedom was attractive. And so for those reasons, I went and had a good time.
You know, my parents both met at Brown University.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, my mom came from Los Angeles, inner city Los Angeles, and she had, I imagine, looking back now in the mid-'70s, it must have been just a totally different world. Single parent home, came to Brown University. My father had just come back from Vietnam on the GI Bill. He went to Brown. I always make the joke that they must have been the only two black folks that were there at the time, which is why they ended up getting together.
There weren't very many there, that's for sure. What year was it, Alfred?
It would have been in the 70s at some point. I mean, let's see, my dad graduated from high school in 1968. He then went to a Vanderbilt from Xavier University in Louisiana. He got drafted to go to Vietnam. He must have spent at least a year in Vietnam, I'm assuming. And then he came back to Brown. Well, he came to Brown, in the, I guess, early 70s. My mom would have been a little younger than him, so she would have come a little bit after.
Oh, wow. I mean, I tell you, in those days, there were not many black folks. I bet if I started talking to folks that I know, who went to school in the late 70s, early 80s, they would know folks who know your folk. Right,
yeah. And my dad, we had the same name, so it would be, you would start with that.
Yeah.
And I did not go to Brown. I'm a proud graduate of Xavier University.
All right.
But, I always, I didn't realize, my wife went to Cornell. which is another Ivy League school. So my family, I'm the only dummy, I guess. That
or the only person with any sense. I don't know.
So my children, when they go to school, I guess they're going to go to somebody's Ivy League school, and I have more of a complex at that point. What years were you at Harvard?
So I began at Harvard. I did a joint degree there.
Okay, you have a master's degree
in public policy and a law degree. So I was there in 1996 through 1999.
So you missed President Obama. He was not there at the time. Is that right?
Yeah, he had passed through.
Okay. Now, had you heard when you were there? I mean, he wasn't obviously Barack Obama, future president at that time, but this is a total assumption. I have no idea. I'm assuming that the black population of students at Harvard is not astronomical. Is that a correct assumption?
What's interesting? It's not astronomical, but when I was there, it graduated, I think, the third or fourth most black law students of any school in the country.
Wow.
Behind just a few others, yeah. So
just period, any law, including not HBCU. Right?
Yeah. But it's a huge class.
Okay, how big's your class?
Oh, I can't remember.
Was it over 1,000 people?
No, not over 1,000 in the class, but it was 400 or 500.
Oh, that's a lot. Yeah, that's about double the size of what my class was.
But and so to answer your question, obviously President Obama wasn't President Obama. He was Barack Obama. He's well known as being Black President of the Law Review.
Right.
First Black President of Law Review. But
and for people who don't know what law review is, can you just kind of explain what the significance of that is and how important that is?
So law schools all have journals that publish legal articles. The students write some of the articles for the journals, but they also edit articles submitted by prestigious lawyers and law professors from other schools. And the most notable of the several journals any law school is the school's law review.
Right.
It's masthead, it's called, the law review. And so to be on law review
in and of itself is an honor, right?
Is an honor. And then to be the president
is even a greater honor.
I was not on law review. I didn't get
I was not either.
I did not qualify.
I also did not go to Harvard. So he was the president of arguably the most prestigious law review in the entire country.
Yes.
Wow. And that's an honor that you hold for a year at a time, 2 years at a time? How does it work?
It tends to be 1 year.
Okay.
It tends to be 1 year role. But, you're remembered always as having held that. So it's kind of in perpetuity.
That's amazing. You are what I'm going to call a sports lawyer, but I know that's a very simplistic term. And I know it's much deeper than that. So we're going to get into that.
Sure.
But you have a great amount of expertise in sports law and all things sports law related. How did that sports law focus start out? Did it start out in law school? Did it start just by happenstance? Was it always your interest?
I've always had interest in sport. But it was totally happenstance how that came to be a part of my career. I'd worked at a big law firm after law school to pay off my.
Right, you're making a lot of money. Yeah,
I was broke.
Like most of us. I'm still broke. That's what I'm trying.
And so I had to go to this big. I didn't want to go to the big law firm, but I kind of had to. And so I was there for a few years, got great experience, but I was ready to move on.
What city was that in? Can you say the law firm?
Yeah, it was here in D.C. It was Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering.
Okay.
It's now called Wilmer Hale. A great law firm, without question.
A world famous law firm. World renowned, I should say.
Extraordinary. I really became, it really improved me as a lawyer, no question. But I didn't go to law school to work at a large law firm. I went to law school to be a civil rights lawyer. That's what I wanted to do. And so I left Wilmer, and I wanted to find a job as a civil rights lawyer. And I applied to a number of different firms and opportunities, and I got an offer from a small employment discrimination law firm called Marion Scallett, which is just a block down from here is where our office was.
From our office where we are now in DuPont Circle in D.C.
So DuPont South is where we were. And Alfred, the first day I got there, the main partner at the firm, Cyrus Murray, said, I know we talked about some cases that I wanted you to work on when you got here, but we've got this matter that involves coaches in the NFL who feel like they're not having opportunities to be head coaches because of color, and I'd like you to work on that.
Wow.
That was the moment. I was like, hold on. So I can focus on sport and civil rights.
Wow, all in one.
Law, all in one.
What an amazing opportunity.
It was like a eureka moment. And from then, I've kind of seized that as my area of focus.
And this was what year around when this conversation happened?
This would have been 2003.
Okay. So now we're about 20 years removed from that. And that's a hot topic in sport now as well. Yeah. Opportunities for minority coaches. Mm-hmm. Have you continued to work in that particular arena?
Yes.
Wow.
Very closely and carefully. I've written a book.
Yeah, I've written 3 books, actually.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to plug your 3 books. I have them right here. Sports Law and Regulation.
Yeah.
The Business of Sports Agents.
Yeah.
And Advancing the Ball, which is, I think, focuses specifically on that issue that we just talked about.
Exactly. Advancing the Ball is just about the movement for equal opportunity for coaches of color in the NFL.
I noticed you say the NFL and not the NBA and not MLB. Why the NFL?
You know, I was a lawyer, and the client was NFL coaches, and so that's where I got my start. I think that the NFL has historically had some challenges with race. All of the professional sports leagues have in this country. But the NFL was the last of the large sports leagues in this country in the modern era to have a head coach who was black. The NFL's got this really extraordinarily odd and unfortunate dynamic at the quarterback position, where traditionally it's been very hard for black folks to play quarterback.
Right. Although it's changing.
It's changing.
Jalen Hurts got a huge contract.
Yeah, he sure did.
Philadelphia Eagles.
He sure did. You got Mahomes and all these guys. Right. So it's changing. But still, I'd say the quarterback population in the NFL is about 30% black, and the player population is over 60% black.
I was going to say 70.
Yeah, it's disproportionate.
Before we go any further, are you a football fan? You know a lot about the law side, but
I am a football fan.
Okay, who's your team? You got to say.
Well, that's an interesting question.
You're a DC native, correct?
Yeah, I'm a DC native. I'm not a fan of the Washington Football Club. Okay. When I grew up, I wasn't.
I'm from New Orleans. I'm a Saints fan. I'm not a fanatic, but I'm a fan. I did not understand why half the people here, maybe more, were not fans of the local football team, but were fans of their most hated rival. It was later explained to me by a good friend of mine who was actually a fan of the Washington team, who my mother told me a long time ago about the name being racist before, so I won't say the name, the old name. And she's not a sports person at all, right? This is kind of ironic. That the Washington football team were the last team in the NFL to integrate. Mm-hmm. And at that time, in the city of Washington, District of Columbia, it was at least 70% African-American. So the football team, which had no black players in a city of predominantly black people, it started to make more sense to me. Mm-hmm. Is that the reason? Is that the similar reason for you?
That is the reason for so many. For me, sadly, my reason was more petty, which is my big brother liked the team. The guy that I went to...
right, the guy that you love so much and followed.
Exactly.
But would not admit it.
And so he loved the team, and so I had to go in the opposite way. So as a kid, I was a Cowboys fan. I lost interest in the Cowboys when I was in college. I didn't love the team under Barry Switzer. There are a number of things about it I didn't like. But I will say this. I was with your mother early. One thing I think in high school, I was repulsed by the name.
Right.
And I have been speaking out against that name for decades.
It's so obviously racist.
It's so obvious. And people were unwilling to either acknowledge it, cognitive dissonance, I don't know what. But it's so interesting that no matter what was done, there were lawsuits that were brought. I represented a client called the Fritz Pollard Alliance, which is the organization of coaches and executives and scouts of color in the NFL. We had a meeting with the club owner.
Wow.
We had a meeting
with the current or the soon-to-be, I don't know.
The soon-to-be former
owner. Okay.
I mean, so we were pushing grassroots. There were lawsuits. Nothing would change it until the finance hit.
The money speaks.
Money spoke.
Always.
And so the name has changed. And so, fortunately, we've got the Commanders now, and so we don't have to deal with that.
I think that's quite a silly name, actually. But I mean, I don't have any vested interest. I'm a Saints fan.
My little boy, I have a 9-year-old. For reasons that aren't clear to me, he became a massive Ravens fan. He loves them.
Well, they're close. It's Baltimore.
Yeah, and so I support the Ravens. I go to some games and enjoy them. A buddy of mine from law school is the president of the club, Sashi Brown.
Okay. That's what happens when you go to Harvard, folks. You get lots of fancy connections after you graduate.
So he's doing great things up there, man. We, excited about that.
Well, yeah, they have Lamar Jackson, the quarterback, just signed a big deal with the Ravens.
Odell Beckham.
Odell Beckham is there. Who's a New Orleans guy. He's from New Orleans, went to LSU. Right. We'll see what they do this year. I mean, I like sports myself, so yeah. We can talk. We actually are going to talk sports, but I'm trying to cater to all of our listeners. I know they may not be as heavy into sports, and maybe we're more interested in you as a lawyer and representing these folks. So one of the questions that I had for you was your book, Business of Sports Agents. Are you an actual? Have you ever represented players in contract negotiations and things like that?
I've not.
Okay,
I've not.
So what's that book about? What is that? Is it about the business, literally, the business of sports agents? Or?
It's about the business of sports agents.
The business side.
It's a co-authorship with Ken Shropshire and Tim Davis. And the book, so, there's a chapter about unscrupulous agents.
Right.
There's a chapter about agency in the international realm. Talks a lot about player transfers from Japan and Korea to the United States in Major League Baseball, for example. There's a chapter on the NCAA's perspective toward agency. The book was written before this whole new world of name, image, and likeness.
Right. How do you feel about name, image, and likeness?
I feel as though there has got to be a mechanism for student athletes to get a piece of the pie that they're creating, piece of the revenue they're creating.
Right.
And NIL, I think, is probably the easiest way to do it, which is why it's come to pass through the state legislation. I think it's not going to be long, Alfred, before student athletes make a very strong push and likely succeed in the push to be viewed as employees. And that'll, as you know, bring in the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Well, I don't. Tell me, I actually don't know.
Yeah, so that'll bring in the Fair Labor Standards Act that requires minimum wage. That requires that you get paid overtime for over 40 hours, all that stuff we're familiar with, unionization. Right. Under the National Labor Relations Act.
So just for both people who may not be as familiar with sports, prior to the name, image, and likeness change in college athletics, prior to that, athletes it was prohibited by the NCAA, the governing body of college athletics, right, for them to receive payment for their services.
Right.
And what I always thought was like, it really seemed, college sports is $1 billion business. You've got to pay the TV contracts, the coaches make millions of dollars, the schools make millions of dollars, the athletes, and this is just anecdotal evidence from, I don't have any particular statistic to tell you, but just anecdotally, I can pretty much assume that most of these young men and women are not going to make it in a professional sport. They're going to do their service for the university, and that's it. And there's no millions of dollars at the end of the day. Everybody goes into it thinking that. So now, if you're able to, you can now receive money from whomever, correct, for your name, image, and likeness, as it relates to your school. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know if I say whomever. There are state legislation that has different guardrails, and the NCAA's got guardrails in the event there's no state legislation in your state. But generally speaking, yes, you can get endorsements, you can get sponsorships, you can get a sponsorship from the local sub shop, you can get a sponsorship from a major apparel company or a drink company.
And you can make millions of dollars in theory.
You can make millions and in fact, there's some of these more than $10 million NIL deals for some of these student athletes.
Wow.
So you can make. Now, let's keep in mind it's a tiny slice of the college athletes who are able to command that kind of money. Most student athletes can't command any money on the free market, but some can, and they do.
You are a professor at American University.
Yes.
Tell us about that. Like, what are you teaching your students, and how do you like being a professor? How long have you been doing it?
I love being a professor. I've been a professor since 2005.
Oh, wow. That's when I graduated law school.
Okay.
So that's a while ago.
It's a minute. Now, I will say that I've always, during that time, and still remain active in practice, do some consulting, do speaking. I feel like it's important for a law professor to be involved still in practicing law.
Yeah. How are you still involved in practicing law? What are you doing?
So I'm of counsel position with that same firm where I had that eureka moment 20 years ago, Marion Scallett. So I'm of counsel there.
For those people who don't know what of counsel is, what does that mean?
Well, actually, of counsel is a pretty broad term. And it references various relationships between lawyers and firms. In my case, it's a situation where I do some work with them at particular times if there's an issue they think I can be helpful with, the issue that I'm interested in. But I'm not an employee of theirs. I'm an employee of the university.
Like an independent, like a free agent, I guess, for use a sports term?
Essentially. And I will say that it's always, it's not a lot of my time.
Sure.
The great bulk of my time is focused on my teaching and my writing.
You have a lot of publications.
Yeah.
Too many to name.
It's funny. You go through these periods of writer's block, and then you go through these periods where you don't have enough hours in the day to write what you want to write.
Right. And what are you writing about primarily?
So mostly about sport and society. So issues of sport and gender, sport and race, usually around discrimination. The book Advancing the Ball we talked about is kind of illustrative.
So these are things that are passionate, you're passionate about.
Yeah.
What do you think the state of those things is currently in the major sports? I guess NFL, NBA, or whatever. MLB, you tell me. What do you think? That is a very broad question, but just generally speaking, what do you think?
Well, it's a good question, and it's interesting because just 5 years ago, a bunch of us who do this work, were kind of out there shouting in the wilderness. People weren't really thinking about the connection between sport and society, and sport and race, and sport and systemic subjugation, and then of course we had 2020. Where George Floyd was murdered.
Right.
And
the world turned upside down.
Yeah, world turned upside down. And a part of that world turning upside down were athletes in this country, across the world also, but in this country, refusing to play games.
Right.
Demanding that they be able to protest publicly.
And there were many people of all races who said, these guys are spoiled billionaires. They need to just shut up and play. What would you say to those people?
I think it's uninformed. I'll say it's an uninformed perspective.
I would agree.
I'll put it that way. First of all, it's critical that folks understand that not all of these professional athletes are billionaires or millionaires.
And even if they were, so what?
But on the first point, on the premise, some of the most active protesters during this period were WNBA players. And they are generally neither billionaires nor millionaires.
Right.
Okay? But even if they were, so what? Why should they have less of an opportunity to express themselves on issues of the day than others?
If the former president, who's allegedly a billionaire, can express his opinion, then why not anybody else?
Absolutely.
This is a free country.
Absolutely. And so we had those protests over the course of that summer, and they've continued to some extent. But I think that woke the world up to this intersection of sport and society. So this area where we were working in years ago, nobody was paying attention to, now people are paying attention to it. It's interesting.
It is interesting, especially because people tend to watch sports to escape from whatever reality that they're living in. Even if it's for a few hours or a few minutes, they're living through these athletes, their deeds, their accomplishments, their failures, and adopting them sometimes as their own. But things that are never discussed, that it's like taboo. It was taboo. You don't talk, even though everybody's African American in these sports, you never talk about race. Yeah. You never should mention your own race. You should just be happy that you're getting this massive paycheck in a lot of people's mind, and just entertain me, basically. And it's I'm glad it's changing. I really am. I'm personally glad it's changing.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
So I got off track, as I tend to sometimes. So I know I asked you about teaching because that's very interesting to me, because both my parents are former professors. They're both retired. And I grew up in and around universities my whole life. So being a law professor to me is like, it's a higher calling. It's awesome. Oh, wow. I'm envious that you get to do it. You get to interact with students and shape the minds of the next generation of lawyers. Now, you're not only a professor, you're a law professor. So Even though you're not at Howard University, I have to go ahead and say that. I mean, I had obligatory. I have to say, full disclosure, you have family members that have graduated from Howard University School of Law.
That's right. I sure do.
And I guess
one of my law school classmates is the outgoing dean, Danielle Holly.
Oh, okay.
Of Howard Law.
Yes, she's going to be the new president at Mount Holyoke College. Yeah. What do you want law students that are going out into the world or still in school or thinking about being a lawyer? What do you want them? What advice would you give them?
I mean, there are many things.
Right, I'm sure.
And I teach the law of professional sports, the law of amateur sports, and I teach civil procedure, which is,
civil procedure, right, yeah.
The rules of how to bring
not my favorite subject.
How to defend it. Yeah, well, you didn't take it under me now.
Right, okay, maybe I should have.
But yeah, it's a bit of a tough and dry area. But there are two core things that I like to leave my students with. Three. One is that the law is a tool.
Absolutely.
And to have been trained as a lawyer and then to be barred, that is to say, to have qualified to practice law, is a privilege, and you've got this tool. And so I think it's, you need to be responsible in the way you wield the tool.
Absolutely. Because it can be taken away from you.
It can be taken away from you, absolutely.
Right. I've seen it happen to people that I went to school with.
Really?
Yes, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. And then the second thing is to recognize that the law is not written on some tablet that's in some museum, that it is dynamic, that it changes, that arguments change it, that you as students can change it.
Right.
Be an activist lawyer.
You have to be.
You have to be. Otherwise, what are we doing?
What are we doing? Yeah, this is not 1776.
That's right.
There may have been some ideas that were good then, but most of them weren't.
Most of them were not.
And they're not relevant in these modern times.
So you got to be able to, you have to anticipate the law changing and be able to roll with it and make arguments to push it. That's two. And then three, and this one, and we can talk about Alfred, I want you to be happy.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of unhappy lawyers.
Lots of unhappy lawyers. I know, I can attest to that. Not personally, but I can, and it's a stressful profession. I mean, everything is, you seem to have a great life. You have a loving family and you're traveling all over the world and you're meeting famous people. Blessed. But I'm sure there are days when you are like, boy, man, this is just too much.
Absolutely. And it's, and that's doing something that I love.
Exactly.
And so I tell my students, look, don't just do what you think is the in thing to do now, the area of law that will necessarily make you the most money.
Right.
Do something that substantively you enjoy, because it's going to be stressful. You're going to have deadlines. They're going to be tough days. And if you're dealing with stuff that you don't care about,
you don't even like it,
or is repugnant to you,
right,
then it's going to be a problem. So those are the things that I like to leave.
I think that's amazing advice. And we'd love to talk about our successes, but we never talk about our failures. Yeah. And the stress that's involved and the real world things. You have, if you want to be a lawyer and a family man or whatever it is you want to do, it takes a lot of dedication and time, and you got to figure stuff out. And you're not going to always get it right.
That's right.
Matter of fact, you will fail a lot.
You fail a lot, absolutely.
And, it's just about getting back up, I suppose.
That's exactly what it's about.
Yeah.
Just getting back up. The ground is no place for a champion. You got to just
I like that. Yeah, I might steal that, actually. You hear it on a future podcast.
I took it from a documentary I saw once. I can't remember who said it.
Right.
But it's true.
Yeah.
Because we're going to get knocked down.
All the time. I mean, I've been knocked down a couple of times this week, literally. Some tough cases, but hey, it is what it is. This is why we do what we do. But before I let you go, I would like to ask you a question that we didn't talk about this off camera, and this may be totally coming out of left field.
Okay.
But were you in the movie Crooklyn?
That is out of left field, Alfred. That is.
Or was the internet wrong?
No, man, the internet's right on that one. The internet's right on that. I was, yeah.
Were you a kid in the movie?
No. I was a dope fiend in the movie.
You were a dope fiend in the movie.
I was a dope fiend.
I got to go back. Because I've seen Crooklyn. It's been a while. I mean, so we didn't talk about this, but Spike Lee had and has a huge impact on me as a person. The art that he has produced. I think the first Spike Lee movie I saw was School Days, and that literally changed my life. That movie, my kids are very young, but I've watched the parts that I could watch with them just to show them of that movie and to normalize those faces and those that culture, which I actively do anyway, to both of them. And how did you get in the movie Crooklyn as a dope fiend?
Oh, man.
And how old were you? Not that much older than me.
No, man. I was, so first of all, your assessment of Spike, he's a trendsetter, a genius in his art, and he's extraordinary. And was very kind to me. So he's
a Knicks fan. We forgive him for that.
He's a Knicks fan, and a big one.
Huge one.
You can't see him wearing any, he's going to be wearing orange and blue anywhere he goes.
Yes.
I played the two of us, if you recall the film, you remember the kids in the film.
Right.
Kids, right? And it was semi-autobiographical, so it was about his childhood and his family. And he and I played these two dope fiends on the block that harassed the kids.
I got to go back and look at this because clearly I didn't pay attention.
No, it was, but our role was small, Alfred. The two of us had small roles, but it was.
Well, he made the movie, so he could make.
Right? He could do it. He put himself in wherever he wants, and I was fortunate enough that he put me in next to him, and so not only was I in the film, but I acted opposite. All my scenes were with him, and I got to talk.
How did you even get to that point, though? I'm curious to know, how did you?
So it was
because that's my guy. He and this is like and Eddie Murphy, just two totally different kind of art that they produce growing up, and I think they're the GOATs of their respective professions. Eddie and Spike, I don't know either one, but those. If I ever had I'm not going to say a man crush, but it would be on one of those two guys. I guess.
Well, I'll let Spike know.
Please do. The brother has really impacted my life. No, seriously. The brother has really, truly. My favorite Spike Lee movie, Mo Better Blues. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no. Mo Better Blues is a fantastic movie. Right. The soundtrack is incredible.
Oh, Terrence Blanchard's from New Orleans. Branford Marsalis is also had something to do with that as well. Yeah. And Branford Marsalis played in School Days as one of the characters in School Days, one of the friends of one of Lawrence Fishburne's. Oh yeah, go back and check it. See, I got you on the Spike Lee stuff.
I'll check that. Crooklyn had a lot of new faces. In a lot of his films, he uses a lot of the actors that he's used previously.
Right.
A lot of new faces.
Giancarlo Esposito, he's in a lot.
There and
Bill Nunn.
Yep.
Rest in peace.
May he rest in peace. Yes. Absolutely. So in this film, Alfred Woodard was a lead, Delroy Lindo. Neither of them had been in Spike films before, I don't think. Yeah.
No.
They had, because Delroy was in Malcolm X, but that was after Crooklyn.
As West End Archie.
West Indian Archie,
yeah.
So
that's actually probably my favorite Spike Lee movie, actually.
Right. And somehow that's set apart from the
others. It's a totally different conversation.
It's a different thing. Right. But there was an open call, and then so I went and auditioned and got a call back, auditioned again, got another one, auditioned again, and then basically I got the job, and it filmed during the summer after my sophomore year in college. So it's the best. I enjoy my work, but it is the best job I ever had.
Oh man, I can imagine.
I spent probably filmed on maybe 4 or 5 days total all summer, but I basically spent the whole summer in New York with my boys, hanging out and having fun.
Oh, I don't know if we could end the interview on a better note than that. I really want to thank you for coming on. I truly appreciate your time. I'd like to be able to call you back, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many more topics that we can discuss. I know you have a busy schedule, but again, thank you so much for your time. And I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope our listeners did as well. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
Hey, I enjoyed it too, man. Appreciate you inviting me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. Please continue to follow the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel at the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour for additional content and videos. See you next time. I'll catch you on the B-side.